Thanks, man. Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hey, hi. A couple weekends ago, I introduced this series, Your Turn, and we're talking about doing good with God's money. And we introduced this series by saying that everything in the entire world really belongs to God in the first place. And so, as such, everything we touch, we possess, we use, it really belongs to God, and we're just managing it for Him. And the word that I used back then was this really weird word. It was the word steward. And we all are stewards of whatever God's given us in this life. And to set it up, I gave you this imaginary exercise. I said, this is what a steward is like. Imagine that I gave you a $50 bill and today asked you over the next couple of weeks to actually bless people in your neighborhood on behalf of me to like bring flourishing to you remember this? I asked you this hypothetical question. Well, 2 weeks ago, a couple of people walked out of church to realize it was not a hypothetical question. I had left $50 bills on random cars in the parking lot with a note, a threat really, saying, use this money for good or else. Did you know this happened? You didn't know this happened. Do you want to know what people did with the money? Because this can happen to you at Heartland. You might walk out of here with more money than you came in with. I had a friend who came up to me last Sunday, and they did the whole thing where like they tell you a lie before they tell you the truth. They came up and they're like, Dan, thanks for buying us margaritas last week. That was so fun. I thought it was funny. I was like ready to give them the bad side of the speech, like the you wicked servant thing. But they were like, no, we're just kidding. Here's what we did. And they showed me a picture. This is my friends Nick and Caitlin, some other Heartlanders. This is Meadowbrook Park over off, I think, Row is what goes by there. I don't know. I'm new to town still. But they gave away free ice cream at Meadowbrook Park. Now, if you've been to Meadowbrook Park, tons of people running, people playing, kids playing. And I don't know if you're like me, but every time I see someone handing out free food, like a baked thing or whatever, I'm like suspicious. And I asked Caitlin, I was like, wow, interesting idea. Did anybody take you up on this? And she said, no. For like 30 minutes, everyone in the park just looked at us suspiciously. I thought, yeah, that checks, totally. She goes, they all wondered, like, what type of cult we belonged to, or like what we were doing, or like what was the catch? Like, we're going to sell you something. And finally, one brave soul popped up. They said, hey, is this really free ice cream? And I said, yeah, do you want some? And he said, yeah, I mean, it's hot. I want ice cream. And so they gave him an ice cream bar. They walked away. And everyone else in the park was watching this happen, realized there was no form to fill out, there was no catch, there was no gotcha, there was no handcuffs, there was no, it was just free ice cream. It was what it said it was. And the whole entire park descended upon Nick and Caitlin. Now, here's the kicker. They start having conversations with people who are just out and about on a Saturday, and they're just doing their thing, and they're blessing people, they're giving away free ice cream. I mean, who doesn't like free ice cream, right? I mean, truly free ice cream. They end up, with my $50, they end up making $75 off of people donations. Stewardship is managing someone's resources on behalf of them in their interest to do something good with it. What do we think about Nick and Caitlin? Yeah. It's like, come on, this is amazing. So today there's a $100 bill in everybody's car. No, there's not. I want to tell you another story, because there's another guy. He sits over here. He might be sitting over here. It's really dark. I can't see. But there's another guy named Mike. Mike was one of the guys who found the note. And right after church, Mike's the type of guy that goes from one church service to a Bible study. That tells you a lot about Mike. Mike, on Sunday afternoon, was going to his Bible study. He works with people who are coming out of prison. And that day, he met a woman who had just been released from doing time, I think, as I understand the story from Mike. And he kind of sized her up and was like, she's the real deal. Like, she has something powerful going on in her life, but she doesn't have any resources. And she was talking about how she's got all these friends who have contacted her about, like, would you apply for jobs? And she said, the only problem, there's one thing holding me back. I don't have a phone, and every one of these jobs has to call me back, and I need to be able to make a phone call. Mike left the Bible study. This is literally 2.5 hours after he had received the $50. He left the Bible study, went to Walmart, got her a track phone, or whatever it was, one of those like cheap phones, like a burner phone even, and said, hey, I know this isn't like the greatest phone, but like this will help you make the calls and have a number and kind of get on your way to start getting a job. And she was blown away by Mike's radical generosity. He said, I think my church just wants you to have this because I just think there's something going on in your life that God's a part of. I checked back with Mike on Friday. She's fully employed, and she's got a job. She's kicking it, and she's doing incredible, all because someone took $50, saw a need, met it. And listen, Heartland, isn't that incredible that that's what you guys got to do? Like one of us, I didn't tell the money where to go. I just was like, here, steward this. And yeah, you know what? Mike didn't get back $50 from her in return. That's not the point. What Mike did was gave a woman a new lease on life. I mean, teach a person to fish, right? You know what I mean? Like he just really made it possible for her to have a brand new economic future. That is good stewardship. One person emailed me yesterday, and they were feeling kind of sheepish, I think. They were kind of like, man, we wish we could have done better. All we did was give some obviously homeless-looking guy at Quick Trip who needed 5 cents from us the $50 to get a drink. And when he looked at it, in his Spanish accent, he said, gracias, Jesus. And she realized, like, this was a thing that God had been putting in her way. And she wrote this to me. This is what I love. She said that it's exciting to grow in stewardship. I appreciate the opportunity the church has challenged me and my family to do good with God's money. That's good for me to know, because sometimes we offer challenges, and I'm like, I don't know if anybody's going to appreciate this. She goes, I appreciate it. And then listen to what she says. She says, this is a snowball effect. Isn't that right? This is a snowball. I want to know now what I can do with God's money. Snowball. We were designed to grow in stewardship. We were designed to grow in realizing how to use God's money for his purposes. I don't think anyone here should, out of nowhere, know exactly how to use all of God's resources. If that was true of you, you'd probably be more like Jesus than anyone else here. We all grow into this. And this is what Jesus taught, a snowball effect in Luke chapter 16. He said this. He said, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. You ever make a snowman? I know, we make snowmen, and we get a little snowball, and it compounds. It rolls over time. And if the conditions are right, it grows really, really large. Jesus said, whoever is dishonest with very little, and that's like the fake snow, I think, like that dusty snow that your kids look at. The yard is all blanketed, but it's all dry snow. And it's not good snow, and you can't pack. It's not packing snow. The conditions are wrong. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with very much. This is a way Jesus has told us that God has ordained this world to work, that trust compounds. It grows. And God's plan for growing your life is to give you a little bit at a time to do well with today, that he can then trust you to do better with his purposes tomorrow. We grow as stewards. Now, not everybody believes this. In fact, today there's people who don't believe this. People live their lives and they kind of like scoff at this. And I want to just show you just 4 verses later, Luke points out the fact that not everybody believed this back then either. In fact, the very people that Jesus was talking to in the crowd that day was religious people. They're called the Pharisees. Look at this, Luke 16, verse 14. The Pharisees, look at what Luke says about them. This is like a real, like obvious, like just tell it like it is, Luke. Just be honest with us. Who loved money. I don't know if you got people who don't follow Jesus, but like they thought about going to church is like, I'm not going to church because like all those religious people, especially the pastors, all they want is money for their private jets, their big houses and their fast cars and all that wasteful, extra. Aren't they supposed to be loving the poor and doing Jesus' work? And you know where that's an age-old problem, because the Pharisees had gotten God's world twisted up with their own initiative. They loved money. They heard all this, and they were sneering at Jesus. They heard that Jesus was saying, you know, God wants to try you with a little thing before he gives you a big thing. But if you are messing up the little thing, you're going to mess up the big thing. And Jesus knew this, and he looked at them. And sometimes Jesus says a hard thing. Is that true? Sometimes Jesus says a hard thing. He says, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. How? Have you ever wondered that? Like, how is it that God knows their hearts? And how does God know our hearts? How is it that God knows if we're being faithful with little? And how is it that God knows if we're being dishonest with little? Well, it's a very simple test. It's a very practical test. It's what I had asked all of these people last 2 weeks ago to do. It's to go do something and then let me see it. Show me what you're going to do and what you did with this money. If you want to know how God knows your hearts, the test is really simple. What do you do when you get more? What do you do when you get more? In all of our lives, there are opportunities that we have at one time or another, and especially in the future for many of us, we will get more from God. Maybe it's a paycheck, maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a sale of something, but you will find yourself having more than you started with. And what do you want to do? What do you do when you, or if you, get more? More is a really fun word for us, isn't it? How many people, I like this word more. You don't have to raise your hand. I know you like this word more. More is the way of the world. Give me more, more, more. Make more room for more. I got a fridge the other day that had 2 cubic feet more capacity than my other one. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, I've got space for more pizza. It's just, we like more. When we get more, oftentimes we follow the world's plan, which I want to just call the build bigger barns phenomenon. The world teaches us that when you get more, what you should do is actually make more space for the more that you have. And so you should build a bigger barn. If you're from Missouri, you got that. If you're from Kansas, good luck. Sorry, was that too harsh? I don't know. I don't want to be angry. Here's what Jesus says. He tells a story. You know the story that Jesus tells about this man who had a banner year, a bumper crop year. He gathered so much grain. He gathered so much grain that he didn't know what to do with all of it. And so he said this. He said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns. By the way, 370 AD, so going back a ways. There's a man in the church by the name of I think the British would call him Basil. I call him Basil. Basil the Great. He's a church father. He preached a sermon. It's one of the oldest sermons that we know of. It goes by this title, I will tear down my barns. And I kid you not, it is like it was preached to people living in the 21st century. And if you follow the journey, which is our weekly Bible reading plan this week, I'm attaching to that reading plan this sermon by Basil the Great called I Will Tear Down My Barns. It is the most convicting thing. Spoiler alert, you will feel crushed by your own selfishness in your heart if you read this, but you also feel grateful to God. So I want to encourage you to take some time this week to listen to or read an 1,800-year-old sermon. So that's my spoiler. Okay. I will tear down my barns. And what am I going to do? I'm going to build bigger ones. And there I will store all my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain. You got security. You can face whatever trial comes your way over the long haul. You've done it. You've been successful. Way to go. Now just take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. This is the world's plan for wealth. It's to build bigger barns and say, more security, more security, more security. And then I get to retire. Then I get to finally build the side-by-side clawfoot tubs that the advertising agencies have been selling me. I finally get to go get a second house in that other tropical destination that's really honestly too hot for you anyway. But I get more and I get to do what? I get to just take life easy. And there is nothing wrong with being successful and nothing wrong with planning for the future, but if our trust is in finances or what we accumulate from our work, God says, you can be a fool. Look what Jesus says. But God said to him, you fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. And then what's going to happen to all that you got, that you prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with those whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Here's, if I could just be very clear about it, here's how the world thinks about it. They go, all right, I've got my barn. And I got all of this stuff that I got to put in this little silo, but this guy's not going to cut it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a bigger barn. I'm going to expand. I'm going to build onto it. I'm going to create just an enormous, that's not enough. I got so much more grain, so I need another barn. And so here, this barn will work, and let me add onto it. And this is one for my mother-in-law, and how about this for my sister who's really begging me to be a part of this too. And so I got barn after barn. Actually, that's not right. Let's go up. Let's go up top. This is what I want to do. I'm going to build bigger barns. If I have more, then I'll have less, right? I'll have less stress. I'll have less anxiety. I'll have less worries about the future. This is the lie that the world tells us, because if you've ever grown your property, y'all have dreams about 10 acres until you got to manage 10 acres. You're like, I thought I'd be at the lake, but now I'm here mowing my own yard. This is a lie. I mean, to run this is not a simple life. More and more and more just breeds complexity and anxiety and stress, and there's never an end to more, is there? And that's why what Jesus says at the end of this story is so important for all of us to hear. He says, this is the way it's going to be with those who store up for themselves on earth treasures. The real secret to being satisfied and to honoring God, God's plan is for us to be rich towards him. Rich towards him. God wants us every one of us, to find the riches and things that money can't buy. Jesus said this, that where your heart is, there, or where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's like there's a string between your heart that comes out of it, and it goes down here and attaches to your wallet. And he says the two cannot be disconnected, that whatever your wallet does is based upon where your heart is, and you can try and disconnect them or snip the cord, but this is just how it is. Your wallet will follow your heart most. So wherever your treasure is, there your heart is also. So if God is looking at the Pharisees and knowing their heart, and if God can tell our heart, we know this. It's that there's a simple test. It's not complicated for God to know where our heart is. And here's what I want to ask you. So what do you do when you get more? What do you do financially? This is the big idea for today, and if you understand and embrace this in your life, if you will trust God deeply, you will fight greed viciously, and you will do good expansively if you understand this. It's this, is that when we get more, we ought to thank God first. We ought to thank God first. From the beginning of the Bible all the way through the end, this is the story of what God tells us about our relationship to the things in our life that we manage. That there's an order and there's a priority for us to actually experience freedom in this life. And I'm going to do my best to kind of like rifle quickly through some high points of this throughout the Bible. I've got a lot of pages here. I'm aware of that. I'm going to try and just go really fast. But I could honestly spend 2 hours sharing the depths of this and nerd out with you all about how God deeply ingrained this in the pattern of our world. I don't think we all need 2 hours. I'm going to give you probably like 15 minutes. I hope that's okay. If you can hang with me for 15 minutes, I think this will be helpful. If you're the type of person who's come to church today and you're like, the reason I don't come to church is because they're always asking me for money, you have impeccably bad timing, just first of all. Because I talk about this regularly, we talk about this regularly, but you're not in a type of church that's going to be closing the doors, locking them, and passing a plate. We've actually never done that in the history of our 37 years here as a church. We've never pressured people into giving money to God. We believe that this is something that God has ordained for those who follow him. And so if this is not your church home, I just want to let you off the hook today. I'm like, don't give here. That's fine. That's totally good with me. That's not the point of the message. That's not the point. The point is, how do we show God that we love him? How do we know the condition of our hearts? And the overarching story from Scripture is that we always are to thank God first. Let me bring you back to the first family fight, the first Jerry Springer moment of history. It comes between two brothers, and this is kind of a weird thing that they're fighting over. They're not fighting over the Chiefs and the Raiders. They're fighting over who is thanking God the right way. I know that's a weird thing to fight about, and it goes drastically wrong. One ends up killing the other. But they're fighting over this idea of how they thank God and what the appropriate way is, and there's jealousy involved here. Here's their names, Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, and they reveal to us really the core of who we are as people. All of us kind of find ourselves being identified and seen in their story. See, Cain was a farmer, and Abel was a shepherd. Cain brought fruit to God, and God rejected it. That seems weird to us. Like, you gave me an offering, but God said no. But that's what happened. But Abel gave an offering of animals, and God accepted it. Why? Well, see if you can find the reason why here in this story. It's a great story. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and their fat. The Lord respected Abel in his offering, but he did not respect Cain in his offering. See, the reason that God respected Abel's offering is very simple, and it's one word. It's a differentiation. It's this word, firstborn. Abel demonstrated us that he was so inspired by God's goodness in life that he was willing to give God of the first of what God had given him. Now, if all of us were to take a poll and to ask, like, was Cain generous, was Abel generous, I believe, even myself, I would answer this way, that, oh my goodness, if everyone in the world treated God the same way Cain and Abel treated God, this would be a better world, because Cain brought an offering, didn't he? I mean, I kind of want to go on record and be like, good job, Cain, like you did the thing. But giving a gift is not the entire thing. It is easy to give a gift. All you got to do is just give it. But to give a gift out of the first of what you receive, that is a whole other thing, isn't it? That is something that allows you to see the test of your heart and to show God that you really, truly trust in him, that there's more where that came from. When Cain took a more measured approach, he gave just some of his crops. Cain gave an offering in the process of time. He took a measured approach. He said, all right, now that I've seen it all, now that I know what it is, I'm going to give God this. And he brought it to God, and God said, I don't know what to do with your lack of faith in your giving, because you gave me some leftovers. You didn't give me a trusting first. And this is a principle that we find in the scriptures. It's ideally, or the idea is formally called theologically God's preeminence. There's not a test on this. You don't need to worry about it. But it's a principle of first fruits, that God is first, and the first are his. God is first, and the first are his. You know, you're in Heartland, our battle cry, our rally cry, the thing that unites all of us together under one banner is this really simple phrase, 2 words, Jesus first. We want to be Jesus first people who live our lives ordering everything underneath his leadership and his direction, because he really brings about freedom and understands how we can actually live this life, making a difference and finding out who he wants us to be. And so we say all the time, Jesus first. In fact, in September, we're going to have an incredibly inspiring teaching series called Jesus First. I'm working on it right now, and Brad's going to help me teach it. It's going to be amazing. Like, we've got so much excitement about what it means for us to be Jesus First people. But listen, even if we never preached a sermon series called Jesus First, even if I never tagged this whole church with a rally cry of Jesus First, us not making Jesus first is not going to stop Jesus from being first. Do you know that? Categorically, whether we recognize him as first or not, God is first. Amen? Like, we don't come to God with our worship and say, now that we've shown up, you're first. He goes, no, just by my very existence, there is no one greater. By my very creation, there is no one more preeminent. By my own wisdom, there's no one more sovereign. And because this whole earth is mine, I want to see those who know that I'm first demonstrate that by giving me their first. Now, this is pretty extreme. It sounds like I'm making some stuff up, but this is what God says to Moses in Exodus 23, verse 19. In the law, God instructs his people to give to him the first. Abel was inspired by God to give him the first, but in the law, God codifies this. He says, bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. In the law, this is a big part of the Bible, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's what we continue to be called the Pentateuch, or the law. God told his people, he formalized this. He said, here's the way I want you to handle all of your economic increase. To bring the first fruits to the house of the Lord your God.
And this gets really, really sticky because do you know what the house of God is? It's the church. And this is where a couple of you are like, that's it, I'm out of here. I can't, this is not one of those. This is one of those, you can talk about tithing, Pastor. You can talk about like me giving money to the church now. Like, is that where this is going? Yes. But listen. I don't want anything from you today. I truly don't. I actually feel like what I'm doing today is giving you God's blueprint for you to have as a tool, as a way for you to get something from us, to see how God actually wants freedom in your life. We're not passing the plate. I want you to know this. Nobody talks about this. We need to know this because there's such freedom in this. But I've heard a lot of people leave churches and never give Jesus a chance because of this principle of bringing offerings and giving money to churches, to the church. Whereas God says, bring the best, interesting, of the first to the house of your Lord your God. It is good and pleasing. This is an incredible spot for an amen that you don't want to give. I know this, but you should give an amen here. It is good and pleasing when God's people show up together, bringing a portion of what he's blessed us all with to say thanks to God for what you've done. He wants that to happen. And I think it's important for us all to hear that because there's this general guardedness in churches that we're out for money. And I get it. I want to tell you just a little commercial break here about my friend Brandon. I want to tell you a story. I met Brandon about 10 years ago. I was living in Northwest Indiana, pastoring a small church, and Brandon showed up. He was dating this girl, and they wanted to get together with me to ask questions about marriage and what would be those steps for them. And so we sat down, we started talking about life, and I said, Brandon, tell me about your life. Like, do you follow Jesus? And he goes, nope, never will. And Brandon was a really successful business guy. I really liked Brandon. He was an incredible electric guitarist. He could play Led Zeppelin like no one's business. I was kind of like really excited about building a relationship with Brandon. I was like, this guy's really cool. He lives down the street from the church. Like, this is my dude. He's my people. And he goes, I'm an atheist, Dan. And I realized, like, okay, we'll just put the Jesus thing over there for a very long time, I guess. And so we bonded over other things. It turned out, week after week, Brandon would sit kind of like in the third row right there. And he wouldn't sing. He would just like sit there and he'd smile or smirk. I don't know. It was like judgy. It was not judgy. I don't know. But I could see in that church, we had windows. I could see everybody. I could see all the reactions. It was really intimidating if you were a person out there because I'd be like, hey, you squinted when I said this. And just want to know what that was about. I did this with Brandon. I was like, hey, dude, you've been smiling a whole lot. And I just know like where you're at. You just are pretty against God. Like, why do you keep coming back? And it was because he was dating this girl. And listen, Jesus is not against that. He is pro people coming to church if they're dating somebody else. And I said, well, Brandon, that's great, man. Like, just keep coming. You're welcome here. Brandon would later tell me that it was that conversation that really opened the door for him to fully experience God. Because week after week after week, he would sit there and one week, I saw him raise his hands in a song. And I was like, bro, that's fine, but like that's kind of like my thing, all right? Like, I know Jesus. You don't know. You're just mocking me. And he goes, no, Dan, I can't explain it. But I feel like God is calling out to me. He went on to tell me this incredible story about just seeing God everywhere in his life. And then he said this. He said, I can't help but think that it's just because you gave me the space in your church to not have to worry about money. He goes, I had gone to another church years before, and the pastor sat me down and told me that I needed to give a certain amount of money to be able to be a person of significance in this church, and that he didn't really care if I followed Jesus. He just wanted my money, and that was so off-putting to me because I looked around, and all of my friends were getting drunk on Saturdays, and so was I, and then they come to church, and they acted all righteous, and I looked around, I was like, this is a hypocritical place. Why would I give you money? And he was like, I sell high-end AV equipment. And I look around and I know how much this stuff costs. And like, you guys have like the best of the best. And like, why would I give you money? Can't you just do better with like a little boombox? Like, gosh, what is this? And then you're forcing me to kind of consider giving to you at a certain money like it's a country club. It's a country club with no golf course, no tennis courts, no pool, no locker room. Like, I don't know what I'm getting out of this. No, I'm not giving you money. He goes, but what I've come, it's the money. What I've come to realize is that all of my preconceived notions, I want to read this because he wrote this out for me. He said, what I come to realize is that you're just like me. You're unexpectedly irreligious. You ask people to give money, but I see that now that you're not perfect. You seem to really think that God is. He goes, and the way that I realize churches use money is actually really noble. He goes, you've never made me feel less for not giving. See, he found space to be open for God, and the next season of his life, he was radically changed. I had the privilege a couple months later of baptizing both him and his wife at that time. They're still together now. And his life has been this radical change of finding freedom. I checked in with Brandon on Friday because, whenever I talk about people, I want to get their permission from the stage because this is a really personal thing. So I checked in with him, and he said this. He said, I said, what do you believe now about money and God? This is, quote, his words. He goes, I believe giving is something we are called to do as followers of Jesus, both financial giving and giving your time. Everything created by God, and it's his. That means everything I have is simply on loan to me from God. And when I realized that nothing I have is actually mine, it made it so much easier to give it away. It's really an amazingly free feeling. And I find giving financially as a way to worship God, kind of like singing and playing music. God doesn't need it from me, but he delights in it. So I give it because I love him. Now, Brandon is one of the most generous people I know. The snowball of trust that he's built with God over the years is incredible. And it's not about money. It's about your heart. God delights in his children saying thank you to him. When God says, bring to me the best of the first fruits of the soil to the house of the Lord your God, he's established a principle of how his community was to be run. And I don't want to talk about tithing. I could nerd out on this. I really want to nerd out on this, but I'm looking at the time, and you don't have time for that. But I want you to know 3 things about what it was to give back to God. It was a test of faithfulness. God was looking at his people saying, would you recognize that everything I have, everything I've given you has been given from me? And would you celebrate the fact that I provide for you? That God, it's not about the people's faithfulness, this is about God's faithfulness. This was the general tithe was brought together to the people in Jerusalem. Not a lot of people know this because they haven't really studied the tithe. They don't really know it. They just heard cheap sermons about it. But there was a second tithe, another, which would have been 10% for Israel. And it went to the Levites. It was a tithe for the Levites. It was the people who worked in the temple because God had asked them to give up all of their economic opportunity and serve him the rest of their lives. And so he made it such that there was economic justice in his community. The second tithe was a tithe of justice. That in God's world, there ain't no tribe left behind, if I can put it that way. And the third tithe, there was every 3 years a third tithe. So track with me if you're a numbers person. Some years you would be asked to give 30% of what you made. How many people glad that we don't enforce the tithe today, right? I mean, gosh. But there was a third tithe. And this tithe was specifically asked for the people of Israel to not bring it to Jerusalem, not give it to the Levites, but to keep it in their local cities. It was to be used in helping the poor come out of poverty, to bless those who were having a financially hard time. It was a tithe of mercy. The principle is that God is merciful and he's compassionate, and he cares for those who can't keep up. A lot of us think that Jesus has kind of made all of this obsolete, but I have really bad news for you if you think that. Because there's a moment when Jesus is challenging the religious leaders about how they tithed. They were giving the tithe so systematically. They were going out to their garden herb boxes and saying, well, God says all of the best of the first fruits of the soil of our ground, and here's some basil, not Basil the Great, but real basil. Here's some basil, and I guess I need to lop off 10% of this plant and bring it to God. And here's some mint. Have you ever grown mint, by the way? There's no way to find out 10% of that. It's just going. But they would go and they would count out all the leaves, and then they would take 10% of the leaves. This is how ridiculous they were. And Jesus says, you're doing the thing, but your heart isn't in it. He says, look at this. This is what Jesus says. And spoiler alert, Jesus can be tough sometimes. He said, what sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. Someone's like, thank you, Jesus, for speaking the truth. For you're careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law. And then look at what Jesus calls out. He calls out the three elements of the tithe. He calls out justice, that all God's tribes aren't left behind. Mercy, that God cares about the poor and what we can do as a community when we pool our resources together to care for the poor. And faith, that God can be trusted. Yeah, y'all, Jesus didn't erase this idea of bringing to God what is first. He doubled down on it. He said, you should tithe, yes, but don't neglect the more important things. I think that's really important for us to hear, because we all can do something with the first in our life to show God what it is that we love him for. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but in our church at Heartland, we are financially set up in such a way that honors these three categories, or what Jesus calls the more important aspects of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. We have different funds that are set up here that allow us to operate in these categories. We have a general fund, which goes towards the justice and faith side. That helps our church continue to be a church, to be a place where we can gather. You know, you would actually bring the tithe to Jerusalem, and then you wouldn't just sacrifice it. There was ceremonies. You would actually throw a feast with what you brought. It was like a BYOT type of thing. You bring your own tithe, but it was also a BYOB type of thing, because you would sacrifice the bull or the pig. It was like tailgating at Arrowhead Stadium had nothing on this. And you would celebrate God's faithfulness. It was this act that the whole entire community celebrated from. And in our church, our general fund is something that we all participate in. We all are blessed from this facility, our resources, our staff, the programs, the ways that we go about blessing people and partnering in God's work across the world. It all falls into those categories of justice and faith. But I want to highlight something that maybe you don't know about because we don't talk about it. Jesus said in Matthew 6 that when you give, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. So I've always struggled with communicating back the cool things to you about what we're doing with some of the money that is coming in to help bless people, especially those who are finding themselves in impossible situations or finding themselves with unfair things happening to them in life. But we have a compassion fund. And for the past 14 years, we've tracked exactly how much money we've given away. I want you to know, here at Heartland, this is an above and beyond gift. We've given away $951,705.04. I didn't add the 4 cents. It's in the actual number. I made sure it was on the slide so you know that this was a real number. This is what you've given away to the poor and those who need it right here in Olathe, Kansas. 14 years. None of it goes to our staff. None of it goes to our operating funds. None of it goes to the lighting bill. None of it goes to any of that. It just goes to people in need. You go, well, who gets this money? And the beautiful thing is that anyone who has a need, who's found themselves in a tough spot, we love to bless. The most recent story, I can't go into details, but we as a church helped a woman who was in a very abusive home situation find safety in a brand new apartment, and we paid her rent for her to be in a place where she could actually be out from the tyranny of something devilishly bad. You did that. You helped bring freedom for this woman who was in a tremendously hard situation. I thought you'd applaud for that, but maybe that's just me. We aid people who face unexpected medical bills. We remind them that God provides for their needs even in the most harrowing of situations. This year, we've blessed 11 families who didn't see it coming, but now they see God's faithfulness to them, especially 11 in terms of medical bills. I love this one, too. It's hard for me to talk about because I'm so grateful for the heart of the people who distribute this. By the way, this is funds that are distributed not by our staff, not by me, but there's a team. It's a team of people from Heartland. It's people who sit in the seats who actually get to choose where is God calling us to bless people. And this year, there was a need with a local couple who runs a mental health facility. They're doing incredible, I can't even tell you about all the incredible work they're doing with families in our church, but also families just in Overland Park. and they had an unexpected thing come up, and they couldn't weather the storm. And so we found out about it. And we knew the work they were doing was so important because it was so blessing people, especially people who couldn't afford to pay. That's part of why they were in the situation. And so we helped them, and we helped them buoy the storm, and now they are back on track, more viable than ever before, and they are helping and blessing more people right here in Johnson County find mental health for themselves in a way that they've never had access to before. You did that. That is the mercy of our church. And it comes, why? Not because we believe that you should give your money to the church because you have to give your money to the church. We've done it because of what the last part of this message is. It's because in the days of Jesus, we are invited to radical generosity. See, Jesus didn't lower the standard when he came. He actually said, no, you should be inspired by God's goodness to give, just like Abel was. And you're still instructed to give, just like the Israelites were. But Jesus opens his hands and he says, I'd love to invite you to give. And the best way, the quickest way I can show you this is from the week before Jesus was about to die. The week before Jesus died, this story is found in John 12. He was at a fancy dinner at a home outside Jerusalem with a woman named Mary who approached him with a bottle of expensive perfume. It was worth an entire year's salary. She opened the bottle. She poured the entire thing on Jesus' feet. With tears coming out of her eyes, she said, thank you to Jesus. Why would a woman do this? And here's my question. Did Jesus want super awesome smelling feet? I don't know. The answer for this is because in John chapter 12, it comes on the heels of John chapter 11. That'll take obvious statements for 100, Alec. But if you look at the end of John chapter 11, you realize that John 11 is the story of when Jesus raised a dead man out of the grave. We find Mary, the same woman with the bottle of perfume, in the same posture in John 11, except for she's distraught. She's weeping at Jesus' feet as he has come into town because Jesus didn't get there fast enough. He was both the miracle surgeon and the miracle drug that she was looking for her brother to survive, and he didn't come. And she utters these two words that are haunting. Lord, if. If you ever buried a loved one, you know the pain of those two words. Lord, if you could have done something about this. Jesus is so moved that he calls Lazarus' name out. They open the grave. He smells, y'all. And he calls his name out. And Lazarus literally rises out of the grave back from the dead. He was dead. Not mostly dead, not partially dead. He was dead. And Jesus called him out and he lived. The story says that she was crying and he came out and people attended to him and touched him and helped unbind him. And then John 12, guess who's sitting at the table with Jesus? The formerly dead guy, her brother Lazarus. Now, if Jesus has raised someone in your family who was dead, wouldn't that change how you handle your most precious commodities? Wouldn't that change a little bit how you handled your money? Wouldn't you feel in your heart this compulsion to say thank you to him? And that's what Mary does first. The exact next thing we see her doing is grabbing this bottle of perfume, which was probably purchased for her brother in the anointing process, in his burial. And she empties it all, a whole year's worth of salary, onto Jesus' feet. It's not hard to understand now, right? Grateful people become generous people. And I want you, friends, to just gently remind you, just gently, that if you follow Jesus, you have been raised from the dead. Do you remember that? I thought you'd applause after that. I don't know. That's just my own heart. But if you follow Jesus, you have been raised. This is what Paul says in Ephesians. He says that we have been resurrected with Christ to new life. that we ourselves know that we are rich in God because of our salvation of Jesus. This is what we celebrated at communion. You take the cracker, you dip it in the cup, and you take and you say, just like Jesus, you were crucified. You died the death that I deserved to die. But then, God, you raised him back to newness of life. And as I consume, I partake in that resurrection. I'm a new person. You've made me new. No longer do I approach this world with the same philosophies of the world, the same perspectives of the world, the same cravings of the world that tell me, build bigger, build better, build for yourself, build new. No, all of this stuff like is just meaningless because I don't need more. I need you more. And when we realize that we've been resurrected from the dead, that the worst thing in your life that could ever happen to you has already happened to you because Jesus has conquered death, it makes us more grateful and generous and giving in our spirit. Doesn't it for you? When Mary walked into the room and poured that bottle of perfume on Jesus' feet, I think Jesus was so happy because he didn't have to wonder, did he have Mary's heart? He just simply looked at what she did first and the value of what she gave. And I think it pleased his heart. I want to invite you, as you consider what this message means for you, to just 3 really simple steps. For some of us, we're facing real hardship in our life, and we're like, man, Dan, you're talking about 30%, 10%. I don't even know. Is there a percentage? I'm here to say, no. There's not a percentage. In 2 Corinthians, we're told to give in proportion as we are able. Some seasons that might be a lot, and some seasons that might be not a lot. But the first thing I just want to encourage you is just if you're not giving back to God, just start somewhere. Start somewhere. And because this is such a willful invitation that we join God and give back generously, we just give as you get. Sometimes you've heard it said like, give to God so you'll get back from God, but I don't want to just kind of mix that up for you. I want you to give as you get, consistently, recurringly, systematically even. As God gives you more in this life, what do you do with the more that you get? We want to be the type of people who give God first. And finally, we're going to aim for more impact. This is the snowball. This is the much has been given, much will be required type thing. For some of us, you're sitting here and 10% of giving would not even change your lifestyle. And it's up to you to wonder, am I giving God what would actually equate to a trusting amount? And some of us, if we're honest, giving 0.1% would absolutely cripple us. And so you're going to give 0.01% because you're going to start somewhere. You're going to give as you get. And you're going to just trust God that he's going to help you do more over the course of your life. And friends, it honors God. And it grows our hearts to God when we give to him first. I'd love to invite you to stand. I want to respond just in a sense of God, you've given us everything. We do trust you and love you. We want to just sing real quick this song of praise and reminder to our hearts to help this truth sit deep in our souls.